What's going on guys, Tanmay here for Telusco Learnings and welcome back to another video tutorial under JavaScript for beginners, and today we are going to be starting off with a new subtopic, that is jQuery UI. So it's different from jQuery, in fact it is built on top of jQuery. So up until now we've been going through a lot of jQuery fundamentals. So we've seen the basics of selectors, we've seen events, we've seen effects, we've seen some inbuilt methods also for DOM manipulations. So I thought let's take this to the next level, because as we move ahead, along with jQuery, this jQuery UI is also a framework or a library which is used a lot in practical scenarios. And since this video tutorial series is all about you getting the practical knowledge, that is you getting something which you will actually implement, I thought let's include jQuery UI also in this entire tutorial series, at least the fundamentals. Obviously we won't be going through each and every detail because it can be completely a separate video tutorial series itself just on jQuery UI, but I really wanted this fundamentals to be cleared for you guys so that you can actually implement some of these things in real world scenarios. Okay, so with that being said, let's just take a little bit of theory on what jQuery UI is, and then we'll also include this new library into our project, so that we'll do in the end of this video. Let's just first understand what jQuery UI is. So jQuery UI is a powerful JavaScript library built on top of jQuery JavaScript library. So we already have been going through jQuery library, right? So jQuery is a predefined, pre-written library which is open source for us, which we've been using throughout the last few video tutorials in this series. So what is jQuery UI? It's another JavaScript library which is built on top of jQuery JavaScript library. So the UI stands for user interface, and you'll understand why it is called UI. So basically it is a set of plugins for jQuery that adds new functionality to the jQuery core library. So it adds more functionality, more features, more user interface, widgets and all on top of jQuery, okay? So we know that jQuery is the core library and jQuery UI is built on top of it, okay? This is clear. So if you want to use jQuery UI, you must include jQuery too. So this is prerequisite, okay? So that's why we've been covering jQuery fundamentals, so that now jQuery UI can be easily understood by you. And although it was not planned for this entire tutorial series, I still think that jQuery UI is very important for you guys to understand, so that you can actually use a lot of things in the practical real world scenarios. Now again, just like jQuery UI is free and open source software or library, we can directly use it. And this was a little bit of introduction. So what does jQuery UI provide us as extra? Okay, so jQuery UI provides us with interactions. So interactions are something that you do with the HTML elements on the web page on the front end. So you can have draggable, droppable, resizable, selectable and sortable kind of features. So you can see sometimes we get advanced user interfaces wherein you can drag and drop some elements on the HTML UI. For example, let's say you have a very interactive and nicely designed calendar, and you can drag and drop the different tasks onto different dates of the calendar, sort of something like that, okay? Then we have different widgets such as accordion, autocomplete, buttons, check radio button, date time picker, and all these things are provided inbuilt in jQuery UI, which adds a lot of features, a lot of functionality, and we'll go through a couple of them in this series. Then we have a lot of effects, extra effects. We already have a lot of effects in jQuery, but then jQuery UI adds even more effects on top of it. We get a lot of utilities, menu and navigation bar functionalities and a lot more, okay? So this was a little bit of jQuery UI introduction. And if you're wondering where do you get this library from, we'll be getting it from their main website. There are many other websites wherein you can directly use CDN type of functionality also, but we are going to be using their main website, that is jQueryui.com. So with that being said, let's actually go to their website, download this library onto our system and include it in our project. Okay, so as you can see on the screen, this is their official website, jQueryui.com. I'll drop the link in the video description, or you can Google it out and you can read through it. You can go through the API documentations and all, but as of now we just want to include this library offline, so we'll just have to download it. So you can see this stable version, just click on it and the download will begin. So there you go, you can see the download is complete. Right click on it, show in folder, it will be in your downloads folder. Just extract the files and you'll get a complete folder. Now a little bit of difference between jQuery UI and jQuery is that in jQuery UI, what you get is you also get a lot of external CSS files and external images. Now because jQuery UI adds a lot of user interface widgets, there are some images also involved and there is some CSS also involved, right? So that's why jQuery UI has a set of CSS and extra images also. The plain jQuery core library was only JavaScript, but jQuery UI also has some CSS and also has some inbuilt images. So you need this complete folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename this to make it simple. Let's do it jQuery UI only. And what we have to do is we have to completely copy this and include it into our code folder. So let's go to our code folder. I'm just going to copy this, and this is our code folder. So as you can see, this is our code folder which has the default.html page. So I'm just going to paste the entire folder over here. So this is our jQuery UI folder, and inside which we have the main jQuery UI JavaScript file. We have jQuery UI CSS file. We have jQuery UI.structure CSS file. And we have jQuery UI.theme file. So these are the 3 or 4 different files which we have to include in our project. Okay. So now that we have downloaded the entire jQuery UI library, let's try to actually include it into our project. So open up your Visual Studio Code or any text editor that you've been using. So now that you've opened up your Visual Studio Code, what you can do is completely drag and drop your entire code folder, and all these folders will come over here. You can see this is our default.html. Now this is a blank default.html page with just the little bit of HTML coding. We have the head tag inside which we have a custom style sheet. So in the CSS folder we have a style sheet which has some little bit of style code. You can completely erase it off because right now we don't have any style. So this is the external style sheet which we have linked in the previous couple of videos. Coming back to the default.html, we have the body. Now let's actually just run this file by clicking go live. Okay, so as you can see, this is our output of this file, because we only have one heading tag which says introduction to jQuery UI, but we still have to include all the jQuery UI library files. That is one of the JavaScript file. So let's include that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy paste this entire thing and paste it over here. But now you know the source is inside jQuery UI / and we want the JS file. So jQuery-ui.js. So this is that JavaScript library for jQuery UI, and we also have to include 3 different CSS style sheets, right, for the jQuery UI, because jQuery UI has a set of CSS style sheets also and set of images also. Now very important thing to note that this jQuery UI.js file has to always be after the core jQuery file. Okay, don't forget this. If you include this above the core jQuery file, it can cause a lot of errors, because you know that the page is rendered line by line. So since jQuery UI is built on top of jQuery, jQuery always has to come first. Okay, so don't forget this, keep this in mind. Now let's link the 3 different CSS. So I'm just going to copy paste this 1, 2 and 3 times. Now this CSS is inside again jQuery folder only. So in jQuery we have the first one, that is jQuery UI.css. The second one is jQuery UI.structure.css, and the last one is jQuery UI.theme.css. Okay. Now if you observe, each of these CSS files have their .min.css also. So whenever there is jQuery UI.min.css, it is nothing but a minified version of the jQuery UI.css. Okay. So whenever you are into production, whenever you are actually making your website live, you usually use the min.css because the file size of that file is smaller than the actual CSS file. Okay, but the code inside it is pretty much the same. But yeah, that's about it. We've pretty much included all the jQuery UI necessary files, 3 different style sheets and 1 JavaScript file. So what we did is we downloaded the jQuery UI files, that is the library files, which consisted of 3 important CSS files. So these are the 3 important CSS files. So this CSS/style.css is something that is created by us, which is inside the CSS folder. And then these 3 things, that is the jQuery UI.css, jQuery UI.structure.css and jQuery UI.theme.css, are the 3 files which are of the jQuery UI library. And then we also need a JavaScript file, which is this one, jQuery UI.js. Okay, so it's inside the jQuery UI folder, and I had mentioned that it has to be always below the core jQuery library file. Okay, so if this is the first line, that is the core library should be the first line, and this has to be below it, because jQuery UI is built on top of jQuery core library. So let me just show you the folder hierarchy as well. So in the code folder, which is open over here in the Visual Studio Code, this is how things look like. We have jQuery UI folder, inside which we have the jQuery UI CSS and JavaScript and whatnot. We have our own CSS folder, inside which we have created our custom style.css, which is basically blank right now. So if you go over here in the Visual Studio Code right now, you can see style.css. If you click on it, currently it's blank. We haven't added any styling as of now, but we've just kept it created, and we have a JavaScript folder inside which we have jQuery core library. Okay, so let's start off with the datetime picker, which is basically a widget. So a widget is essentially a component which is predefined, and what it helps us achieve is it helps us achieve a lot of functionality, which if we actually create it from scratch will take a lot of code, especially JavaScript code. But since it is already predefined in jQuery UI, it is just one line of code which completely creates the entire user interface of datetime picker. So let me just show you on the screen how datetime picker looks like. And as you can see on the screen, I'll put it somewhere on the screen. You can see that it is basically a calendar tool, which if you actually try to design from scratch in HTML, JavaScript, it will take a lot of line of code. But let's see how jQuery UI helps us achieve this in just single line of code. Okay. So I'm just gonna click on this so that we have more room over here. So at the bottom, let's open one more script tag, and inside this we will write the jQuery code. So what I've done is I've given this division an ID of my div. So I'm just gonna use the jQuery selectors to select that division. So I'm gonna say dollar. Inside I'm gonna say hash my div, and I'm gonna say dot. And there's an inbuilt method that I'm gonna call. I'm gonna say date picker, opening and closing round brackets and semicolon. And immediately, as you can see on the right hand side, we have a complete calendar which is directly rendered onto the screen. So what exactly happened over here is, since we have included the jQuery UI library, it has inbuilt methods. For example, currently we are looking at the date picker method. So when you call this method, the complete date picker is created inside this selected division. Okay. So right now we selected this division, we gave it an ID, and that's why we got this date picker, which is completely created in the backend in the jQuery UI library itself. So you can go through the methods, but I'm pretty sure as a beginner you won't really understand. But the core purpose of this UI library is to actually use the inbuilt methods instead of getting into details how exactly is the calendar rendered. So you can see this one single line of code. We got a complete calendar with the current date selected. It's January 2nd. And then you can go next, go back and do a couple of things which we will see as we move ahead. So let's see some different variations that what we can do with this datetime picker and date picker control. Now, of course, in real world scenarios, if you're working on some project, a lot of times you have to have a datetime picker, a date picker, a calendar control. And in that case, if you actually go ahead and start coding everything from scratch, you'll take a lot of time. So this jQuery UI helps us do that in one single line of code, as you can see, and it is pretty much used a lot in practical scenarios. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an input tag. So I'm going to say input, and I'm going to give it an ID. I'm going to say my input, or I'm going to say date input. Okay. So what we'll do is, right now you can see in the selector what I did is I selected the division. So that's why this date picker was created inside this division. So what we can do is, another variation we can do is, instead of selecting the division, we can select this input tag. If I just copy the ID and paste it over here, you can see right now you cannot see the calendar, but it is actually present. So if I click on this text box, you can see the calendar opens up. If I click outside, it fades out. So this is amazing, right? So if I give a placeholder over here, click to select date. Okay. So if I click on it, you can see the entire calendar is created. And the best part is, if I select a particular date, let's say I'll select tomorrow's date, which is 3rd January. If I click on it, immediately that date is also coming over here. So the first one is month, then we have date, that is day, and then year. So that's how the pattern is, MMDD and 4 times Y. Now if I click on it, you can see which date is selected currently. If I select something else, the date is changed. So this is all by just one line of code. I'm not even doing anything. And there are still many more variations that we can do with this datetime picker, or date picker actually. So what are the different things that we can do? Because obviously we need some kind of customizations also. For example, when I click on this, what if I want to see 2 or 3 months side by side? That is, I want to see multiple months in this entire big calendar. Okay. So in that case, what you have to do is, we have to pass certain predefined parameters in this method. Okay. So we have to pass arguments, and the arguments are passed in the form of key value pair. So remember, when you go ahead in the style sheet, when you create a style, let's say I'm creating a style for this division, my div, and if I say border colon 2 pixel solid and give it a color, you can see I'm getting a border. I can also add a padding 10 pixel. Okay. So now you can see that when I'm giving CSS styling, we have to give the style name, colon, and whatever value it is, right? Similarly, in this date picker, if you want to add certain predefined customizations which are already provided, but you can toggle them on or off or change them depending on different options, what you have to do is you have to pass them as key value pairs in curly braces. So similar to the way we are passing things in curly braces, we have to create curly braces over here. So we have to give the parameter name and we have to give the parameter value. So there are many predefined parameters. I'll drop a link in the video description if you want to check them all out. Let's see and go through a few of them. So let's say, as I mentioned, if you want to click on this and you want to see more months side by side. Okay, so what you can do is, coming back to the code in the curly braces, I'm going to hit enter over here because I'm going to add multiple things. The parameter name is number of months. Now this is case sensitive, so the first letter is small, then we have O as capital and M as capital. So all of them are combined, but every new word starts with a capital letter except the first one. You have to give colon and you have to add how many number of months you want to see. So if I say 2 and if I come over here and click on it, you can see 2 months are added. So January and February is added. So let me just actually increase the size of the browser and you'll probably see it well. So you can see 2 of them are added. So coming to the code, if I give 3 and if I click on this, you can see January, February, March was also added. So this is something that you can do. I'm going to give 1 over here and I'm going to reduce this. So let's stick to 1. So let's see what all things can we do more. So let's say what you want to do is you want to change your month and year and have a drop down over here to change the month and year. Okay. So instead of scrolling ahead and clicking back, you cannot go a lot of times before, right? Like let's say you want to go 2 years back. Are you going to click this like 24 times to go 2 years back? No, right? You just want to drop down over here and directly select the year, right? So what you can do is you can add that option also. So just hit comma over here. If you want to add multiple parameters, hit enter and the option name is, or parameter name is change year colon, and this takes a boolean value that is true or false. So I'm going to say true. Now if I click on the text box, you can see I'm getting a drop down to change the complete year. So I can change anything over here. I can directly go a few years back or few years ahead in time from the current date. Using this drop down, it becomes very easy. Okay. Now that similar thing can be done for this months also. So add a comma. Along with change year, you can have change month. And by the way, as I mentioned, this is case sensitive. So small caps won't work. You have to do it as it is. So now if I click over here, you can see I'm getting a drop down to change the month also. So instead of going ahead using these arrow keys, I can directly use these drop downs. So one more thing what you can do is you can add the week number which you are currently into. So the parameter for that is show week colon, again boolean value true or false. Right now by default it is false. So if I click on this, you can see we are in the last week and then the next week starts, that is the first week starts from the next week actually. So 1, 2 and 3 and week number, and you can see the initial value of WK which stands for week. Now you can change this WK by saying week header colon. Now this is a text value, so you have to pass a string. I can say weeks or I can say WK number. If I click on this, you can see it is coming WK number or WKNO. Now sometimes what happens is if you've seen a particular calendar control, when you are in a particular month, now currently we are in January, right? You also can see dates of the previous months, right? So you can see these two spaces are blank over here and these two spaces are blank over here because those have dates of the previous month and these two blocks are for the next month. But sometimes in calendar controls, you can see that these are visible, but they are not highlighted. They are kind of like disabled or faded. So you can do that kind of feature also by making another parameter true, and that is show other months colon, again a boolean value true. Now if I click on this, you can see 30 and 31, but they are very faded out because they are values or dates from the previous month, and you can see 1 and 2 which are values from February, and we are currently in January. So the last two customizations that I want to talk in this video are min date and max date, which comes in as a part of validation and it is kind of important. So obviously you cannot or you don't want to travel all the way back, right? Sometimes you have a validation point that you can only go 1 year back and 1 year ahead, or you can go like 30 days back, 30 days ahead, right? You cannot book a travel ticket after a particular period of time, right? So if you are traveling from one place to another and you're booking a plane ticket, there is a limit to which you can book dates for, right? You cannot go ahead and say I want to book a ticket for 10 years from now, right? Obviously that's not valid. So that comes under validations, and that can be done using the min date and max date property. So let me just show you how it works and then I'll explain to you. So this is min date property, and here it takes a date object. So date is a predefined object in JavaScript. We've not really talked about that in this video tutorial series, I suppose, but I'll drop a link in the video description. We've talked about objects, so I'm pretty sure you'll easily understand it. So the way we create an object is by using the new keyword, and then what we are passing is we are passing the year number, we are passing the month number, and a lot of times numbers in programming start from 0, right? So this 0 is basically January, so 11 would be December, so don't make a mistake over here. And then this is the actual date of the day, okay? So year, so YYYY, MM and DD, okay? So what I have set over here is I'm saying you cannot go beyond 2017 more backwards, okay? So you cannot go into 2016, and the max date is how long or how much in future can you go. So I've set 2020, 0 stands for January and January 1st, okay? So I can change this to 5 also. Let's change this to some other number to validate it properly. Now if I click on this, I can go to 2018, I can go to 2017, but you can see I cannot go beyond that. If I go to 2017, you can see I can select 5, but I cannot select 4, 3, 2, 1 because we have selected that the minimum date has to be 5 January 2017, right? So I cannot go more behind that date. Similarly, I can go to 2020, but I can only select from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I cannot go beyond that ahead in time because we've set 5 January 2020 as the max date, okay? So yeah, these were some different customizations available with datetime picker, and as you can see, this one small line of code, that is only this much line of code, gives you so much functionality. And if you didn't have jQuery UI, you would have to actually design entire thing with all those images, with all so many customizations, with the drop downs and whatnot, you know. And as a beginner, obviously this is not possible for us. But since jQuery UI is open source, free to use, a lot of developers directly use it because they want to reduce their development and programming time. And you can see there is a lot of customization, so a lot of things can be done in jQuery UI. So this is one of the practical applications, that is the widgets in jQuery UI, and we'll see few more of them, different types of widgets which you can actually use in your projects. And in this video tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at another widget which is provided in the jQuery UI library, that is the tooltip widget. Okay, so coming to the entire code, this is something that we've been doing in the previous couple of videos also. So as you can see, we have the 3 different CSS files of the jQuery UI library, and we have the JavaScript file of the jQuery UI library, which has to be always below the jQuery core library, okay? So all these things are there in the folder structure. So if you want, I'll just show it to you. So this is the code folder, inside which we have the entire folder hierarchy. We have the CSS folder, we have the images folder, we have the jQuery UI folder and the JavaScript folder, that is the JS folder, inside which we have the jQuery core library. In the CSS folder, we have our custom style.css, and then the jQuery UI CSS comes in from this folder, okay? So that's something that you can see from over here also. So in the body, we have a division, we've given it an ID of my div, and in the styles.css, we have given it a 2 pixel border of purple color. So that's what is seen over here, and we've also given it a 10 pixel padding. Lastly, we have a header and we have an image. So this is the Telesco logo. So what I've done is I've given it a title. So this is an attribute. So what this title attribute does is when you hover onto the image, you can see a small, so this is a default tooltip in HTML, and you can see that it is not really styled, it just looks very basic. So jQuery UI provides us a custom tooltip which is a little bit advanced, and the look and feel and some functionality to it is been added in jQuery UI. So let's add that tooltip to this image attribute. Now you can add this tooltip to any of the HTML element on the web page, but we'll add it to the image attribute over here. So in the script tag over here, let's select this image. So I'm going to use the element selector. I'm going to say $, in the double quotes I'm going to say img. So it will select all the images basically, but right now we only have one image. We are not selecting it by ID or class. We've seen the selectors in the previous video tutorials of this series. I'm going to say dot, and again I'm going to use an inbuilt method in jQuery UI. So that's how we create widgets, by using inbuilt methods. So I'm going to say tooltip, opening and closing round brackets because it's a method, and semicolon. So this one single line of code, basically what it does is selects this image onto the web page and creates and adds a tooltip which is customized in jQuery UI. So let's see this in working. Let's hover onto this image. So there you go, you can see a big tooltip which is shown over here, which is below the image basically. And you can see it is very different compared to the basic tooltip that we were seeing, which was provided by default, right? So this looks pretty good, you know. So now we can have different customizations with this tooltip widget also. And the way we provide different customizations is we have to pass all those details of those customizations using key value pairs in curly braces inside the method itself. Okay, so we have to pass them as arguments or as parameters, and there are some predefined parameters which we can change. That is, we can change the value of those parameters. So as I mentioned, we have to do key value pairs. So just like in the style.css, what we do is we say what we want to change and then the value, right? So this is the name, or you can say this is the key, and this is the actual value. Again, over here the name or key is padding and the value is 10 pixel, right? So similar to that, we have to do curly braces inside the round brackets of the method, hit enter, and now you can do this key value pair just like what we did in the CSS also. So now currently when you hover onto this image, you can see that the tooltip is coming pretty below over the division, right? So it's not really coming near that image. So what if you want that tooltip to basically track the cursor? So wherever your cursor goes, the tooltip will also follow you. So that feature can be done by using or turning on an inbuilt option. So whenever we are talking about customizations with widgets, we'll call them options. So we have one option which we have to turn on, and that option name is track. Okay, so you have to say track. So this is the name and the value is a boolean value because you have to turn it on, right? So you have to say true. And when I do this, now if I hover onto the image, you can see that the tooltip is following the entire mouse or cursor onto the image. So wherever I am going on the image, the tooltip is also following me. Pretty cool, right? So one thing to note that if you don't have this title in this image tag, you'll not see any tooltip by default. So what if you want to add some text to the tooltip? Not over here, not in the title, but in the code itself. Okay, so we have that option also. If you want to add multiple options or multiple customizations, you have to hit comma and then add the next key value pair. Now to add that tooltip text, the attribute name is content colon, and it's that part, and it takes a string. So we are gonna say Telesco is the best. Okay, now if I hover onto the image, you can see it's still not coming because we still have to add a title. Okay, so that's a necessary thing that I wanted to show you, that without adding that title you cannot actually add new things via the code. Because what happens is in the jQuery UI, what it does is it looks for that title attribute in the image tag itself and then it modifies that. So that title attribute, even if it is blank, we have to have it. So I'm going to say title colon, and even if I keep it blank, you can see that it's still working because what is happening is the jQuery UI library is finding this image, it's searching for the title attribute and it is adding this Telesco is the best inside this title attribute dynamically in the code. So now you can see if I hover, Telesco is the best is showing as a tooltip. So another customization or option that you can do is you can basically add different effects to this tooltip. So right now when I'm hovering, you can see that the tooltip is fading in and fading out, right? So by default it is fade in and fade out. So we can change that also. So we have different kinds of effects. So let's see how that works. Give a comma and what you can do is you can type in show colon. Now for effects, what you have to do is you have to add one more set of curly braces, because effects consist of multiple things. You have to specify what effect and we have to also specify the duration, right? So that is the reason why you have to add multiple curly braces. So we have one curly braces which is for all the options, and then one option is a little complicated one. It's not a simple one. So that's why for this show property or for this show attribute, you can say, or key, the value has to be in curly braces. So this show attribute consists of two sub attributes, you can say, or two sub properties. The first one is effect, which effect you want, give colon, and it takes a string value. So I'm going to say bounce. You have to give comma over here, and now you have to also give duration. Give colon, and now this takes a numeric value which is in milliseconds. So I'm going to give 2000 milliseconds, which is 2 seconds. Okay. So this show property or show option is a combination of two sub options or sub properties. So that's why we have to wrap them in curly braces. The first one is the which effect we want, and the second one is the duration. So now if I hover on this Telesco image, you can see that the tooltip came in from the top and it kept bouncing for a little while, right? So let me just first turn on the tracking off. And now if I hover onto this, you can see the tooltip was bouncing for some time. If I increase the time, you'll see that the Telesco is best tooltip bounces for quite a lot of time, right? So similar to this, we have another effect which is pulsate. Now if I hover on the tooltip, you can see that the tooltip is pulsating. That is, it is toggling between fade in, fade out, right? And it happens for 3 seconds because we've given the duration as 3000. If I give 1000, it will do that for only 1 second, and it will do it a little fast. Okay. The next effect is highlight. If you hover on the image, you can see that the tooltip was yellow for some time. So you can increase this duration. Let's make it 3 seconds. Now if I hover on the image, you can see the tooltip initially was yellow because it got highlighted. One more is explode, which is pretty cool. You can see if I hover on the tooltip, different parts of the tooltip combined together and gave it a pretty cool effect. And the last one is blind. So I've written blind over here. If I hover onto the image, you can see how it is showing up. That is, the tooltip is showing up in a blind effect. And yeah, these were some different effects. Now this was when we hover onto the image and when the tooltip is coming in. So what if we are going outside the image? It's still fading out, right? So we can have that different effect for fading out also. That is, when the tooltip is hiding, even that can be changed. So just copy this and hit comma and paste it over here, and instead of show, what you have to say is hide. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say explode over here, and here I'm going to say bounce. So when I hover onto the image, you can see the tooltip is bouncing in, but when I'm hovering out, you can see the tooltip is exploding. Pretty cool, right? So yeah, this was a little bit on this tooltip widget, which is adding a little bit of enhancements on the existing tooltip, and you can do pretty cool stuff with different kinds of situations. So this was just us giving some tooltip to image. You can do that to text, you can do that to paragraph, you can do that to different HTML elements, and you can add some effects also and do a little bit of customizations.